In the shadows where truth and tales intertwine, we find the thrilling, the chilling, the downright spine-tingling. From the paranormal to the peculiar, every echo has a story. Dare to delve into the unexpected, the unexplained? Brace yourself, for you're about to embark on a journey where fear meets fascination. Stay tuned if you dare, for stories that will make your heart race and your mind ponder. Welcome to the realm of the eerie, the realm of the unknown. And remember, like and subscribe, if you dare. Have you ever questioned the reality you live in? Imagine having it shattered in a day. That's precisely what happened when I was promoted to special agent in the FBI at the age of 26. I was the youngest to climb the ladder in my station, but little did I know this was not a typical promotion. There I was, an eager agent, fresh-faced and ready to make a difference. Then, my senior colleague Joe, a seasoned veteran with years of service under his belt, introduced me to a new world. A world that was hidden behind the steel gates of a heavily guarded army base. A world whose key was held by a man named Captain Turner. Captain Turner was an imposing figure, a seasoned army captain with an aura of authority that could make even the bravest hearts quiver. His reputation preceded him. He was known for his stern demeanor, his unflinching resolve, and his mysterious duties that no one seemed to fully understand. Joe and I arrived at the base, where Captain Turner greeted us outside a small, impenetrable-looking building. The security was unlike anything I had seen before. It wasn't just a badge that granted you access, but face recognition technology too. Once inside, we were led to a room with a single desk and a lift at the back, the air heavy with an unspoken secret. Joe introduced me to Captain Turner, explaining that I would be replacing Alex. He mentioned I needed to be read in, whatever that meant. With a nod of agreement, Captain Turner began to speak, his words like ice-cold water pouring over me. He told me to forget everything I thought I knew, to prepare for a revelation that, if mishandled, could lead to severe consequences. Suddenly, my promotion didn't seem as exciting as it had a few moments ago. Little did I know, this promotion was a ticket to a world beyond my wildest nightmares. A cold shiver ran down my spine as Captain Turner uttered, "Young man, forget everything you think you know." His words echoed in the room, bouncing off the cold, sterile walls. The heavy silence that followed was broken by the captain's grim declaration. "What I'm about to tell you is punishable by death. If you breathe a word to anyone, we will erase you and your family from existence." His words were as stone cold as his gaze, and I could feel the weight of their meaning sink deep into my bones. Captain Turner shifted his gaze towards an insignia, a badge that held a peculiar design. It was handed over to me with an air of reverence. "You're now clearance level Z12, he said, his voice echoing the gravity of the situation. The badge felt heavy in my hand, like a small child clutching a candy far too large for him to comprehend. The captain then proceeded to introduce me to what he referred to as Project Woodland. He spoke of monitoring unknowns in our national forests, reacting to hostiles, and documenting findings. The words unknowns and hostiles hung in the air, their meanings vague and ominous. It felt as if I had been handed a puzzle with missing pieces. I was to act as a go-between, investigating reports from national parks and determining their level of hostility before taking action. But what action, and against what? The captain's answers were as cryptic as the questions themselves. As the briefing came to a close, my mind was a whirlpool of confusion and intimidation. The gravity of my new role felt immense, and the unknowns that lay ahead seemed like monsters lurking in the shadows. I was left with more questions than answers, the biggest one being, what exactly were these unknowns? My mind raced, but I couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what lay ahead. I was stepping into a realm of uncertainty, a world where the line between reality and fiction was blurred. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a journey into the unknown. The words hostile entities echoed in my mind. Was this some kind of sick joke? I thought. My mind was a whirlpool of confusion, disbelief, and trepidation. The room, once filled with the hum of casual conversation, was now silent, the tension palpable. The term hostile entities was not one you came across in the usual FBI lexicon, and certainly not in the context of national parks. This was a realm of bears and mountain lions, of lost hikers and campfire stories. Not of, what, monsters? The word seemed ludicrous, even in the privacy of my own thoughts. Yet Captain Turner's stern expression gave me pause. This was no jest. This was as real as the badge he'd handed me, as real as the impenetrable building we sat in, as real as the fear that was slowly creeping up my spine. As if sensing my turmoil, Captain Turner spoke, his voice a low rumble in the silence. "This meeting never happened," he said, his gaze piercing. "You breathe a word to anyone, we will erase you and your family from existence." The threat hung in the air, heavy and menacing. For the first time in my life, I felt the real weight of my oath to serve and protect. This was not what I'd signed up for, but it was now my reality. Joe, the man who I'd looked up to, who had mentored me, now seemed like a stranger. His calm acceptance of this bizarre situation was unnerving. But what choice did I have but to trust him? He was my only lifeline in this surreal scenario. As we left the base, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. What had I gotten myself into? The world as I knew it was crumbling, and in its place, a harsh new reality was emerging. One filled with unknowns, hostiles, and entities that lurked in the shadows of our national parks. This was my life now. And as the enormity of it all sank in, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever be ready for what lay ahead? The car ride back was filled with an ominous silence. I had to know more. It was me, Dennis, in the passenger seat, my gaze lost in the passing scenery, but my mind was elsewhere. "Joe," I found my voice. "What was that meeting about? What's going on?" My words hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty and dread. Joe didn't respond immediately. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and looked at me. His eyes, usually filled with warmth, were now cold, almost distant. "All the monsters and beasts of legend, that's what we deal with," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the car. Monsters, beasts of legend. Was this some sort of joke? I laughed, a nervous, disbelieving laugh. "You're kidding, right?" Joe just shook his head. The look in his eyes was enough to convince me he wasn't kidding. "You're the handler for all national parks where cases of the unknowns come up," he continued. The words echoed in my mind, each syllable a hammer blow to my understanding of the world. I was to be a handler of monsters, of creatures that were supposed to exist only in fairy tales and horror movies? The drive back continued in silence. I sat there, my mind spinning, my grasp on reality shattering. I thought about all the beasts of legends, such as fairies, elves, Bigfoot. And then there were the more worrisome ones, werewolves, wendigos, Mothman. And what about all the ones I didn't know about? Joe's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "Don't worry, try not to overthink it. You'll get the hang of it, and I'll be here to guide you." His words were meant to be comforting, but they did little to ease my fear, my disbelief. My mind spiraled out of control as the reality I knew was replaced by a world filled with nightmares. This was the beginning of a journey I never asked for, yet had no choice but to undertake. The car ride back from the army base was the longest drive of my life. As the landscapes blurred past the window, my mind was a whirlwind of confusion and dread. I was no longer just Special Agent Dennis. I'd become a handler for the unknowns, the beasts of legend that supposedly lurked within our national parks. As I sat there, my mind spiraling out of control, I couldn't help but recall the tales I had heard as a child. The elusive Bigfoot, the mischievous fairies, the haunting wendigos. But they were just stories, right? Just figments of our imagination, born from the human instinct to fear the unknown. But now, they were my reality. My mind was abuzz with questions. How was I to investigate these unknowns? What would I do if I encountered one? And most importantly, how was I to keep this secret from the world? The weight of my new responsibility was overwhelming. Seeing my distress, Joe, with his years of experience, tried to reassure me. "Don't worry, Dennis," he said, his voice steady and comforting. "It's a lot to take in, I know, but you're not alone in this. I'll be here to guide you every step of the way." His words brought me a small measure of comfort. But the reality of my new role still loomed large. I was no longer dealing with the ordinary. My job now was to protect the world from the extraordinary, from threats that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. As we neared the city, the last rays of the setting sun cast long shadows over the landscape. In those shadows, my imagination began to conjure images of the unknowns I might face. I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. As we drove back in silence, I couldn't help but wonder, what horrors lay ahead in the shadows of our national parks? Imagine being thrown into the deep end in a pool filled with unknowns. That's how my initiation into Project Woodland felt. Suddenly, my quiet existence was transformed into a whirlwind of chaos. The phone on my desk became a constant reminder of the vastness of the unknown lurking in our national parks. The relentless ringing, a deafening echo of the urgency and gravity of the cases that lay ahead. The question that hung in the air was, how am I going to keep on top of all these cases? A seasoned colleague, Joe, saw my bewilderment. He leaned in, eyes full of a wisdom earned through years of experience, and said, "Welcome to the big leagues, son. You'll need to learn fast how to prioritize and delegate." His dismissal was curt, the gesture clear. There were more pressing matters at hand. Returning to my desk, I began to construct a system, a lifeline amidst the storm. A system designed to bring order to the chaos, to prioritize the urgent cases over the rest. The high-priority cases were missing children. The mid-priority ones were missing adults, murders, and animal attacks. And the low-priority cases were suspected suicides, sightings, encounters, and the rest. The system was simple. Act quickly based on the case and its respective priority level. Only when there were no high-priority cases would I move to the mid-priority ones, and so on. In hindsight, this method was far from perfect, but it was a start. It was the first step towards navigating the murky waters of Project Woodland. I didn't realize it at the time, but this method wouldn't be the best one to follow. However, I had to start somewhere. And so, armed with my rudimentary system, I embarked on my first high-priority case, unaware of the chilling realities that awaited me. The phone rang. My first high-priority case had arrived. I could feel a sense of urgency, a growing chill in the air as I picked up the receiver. A boy had disappeared from a nearby national park, and I was to spearhead the investigation. The park was bathed in a surreal silence as I arrived, broken only by the desperate cries of a woman. Sarah, the mother, was in a state of absolute panic. Her son, she claimed, was taken by something in the woods. My initial thought was a kidnapping, a dreadful but all too common occurrence. But as Sarah's story unfolded, it became clear that this was no ordinary case. Sarah described the incident with a chilling detail that sent shivers down my spine. She spoke of her son, Freddie, playing by the river when she saw something from the corner of her eye. She thought it was a bear at first, but then it stood up like a man. Sarah was insistent it wasn't a bear, it was something else, something that defied explanation. Her father had filled her childhood with tales of large, hairy creatures in the woods, stories she shrugged off as mere superstitions. Now, she was living a nightmare, her son taken by the very creatures she refused to believe in. Sarah chased after the creature, but it had vanished into the thick foliage, leaving no trace of Freddie. The park was their playground, a place to spend the day, while Freddie's father, Jason, was at work. But that day, it had turned into a hunting ground. As I listened to Sarah, my mind raced with possibilities. A bear? Unlikely, but not impossible. A kidnapper in a costume? A desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless. But Sarah was insistent it wasn't a bear. She had seen something out of this world snatch her son away. This was my first encounter with the unknown. A boy had disappeared. A mother was in despair, and I was left grappling with a mystery that defied everything I knew about the world. It was my first high-priority case, my first step into the shadows of Project Woodland. Little did I know, it was just the beginning. The park ranger, George, had a different perspective on things. He was a seasoned veteran of the wilderness, his face etched with lines that told a story of countless encounters with the unknown. As I approached him, his eyes held a depth of understanding that was unnerving. With a solemn nod, he beckoned me over, an air of urgency surrounding him. "We need to call in search and rescue," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you and I, we need to follow the beast." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Are we not trying to rescue the boy?" I asked, my voice betraying my confusion. George ran a hand through his silver hair, his gaze fixed on the dense forest ahead. "You're new to this, aren't you?" he asked, not waiting for a response. "We have to keep up appearances, put on a show for the folks back home, but we're dealing with something that doesn't play by our rules." His voice was grave, a stark contrast to the tranquil serenity of the forest around us. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, my mind racing to keep up with his words. "So you're saying—" I trailed off, the implication of his words hitting me like a punch to the gut. George nodded, his gaze never leaving the forest. "The boy, it's likely he's already gone." His words were like a cold slap to the face, but there was no time to process the shock. We had a beast to chase. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, following the monstrous tracks, a sense of dread washed over me. What kind of creature were we dealing with? And more importantly, what were we going to do when we found it? George turned to me, his eyes filled with concern. We had to keep up appearances, but the truth was we were chasing a beast. We followed the tracks deep into the forest to a place where humans seldom tread. The dense canopy overhead cast long, eerie shadows that danced and flickered as the wind rustled the leaves. The undergrowth was thick and wild, crunching under our boots with every step we took. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a stark reminder of the raw, untamed nature that surrounded us. We were tracking a beast, a creature that had snatched a child away from his mother's watchful eye. The tracks were large, much larger than any humans, and they led us deeper and deeper into the wilderness. We moved with caution, our eyes scanning the area for any sign of the monstrous creature or the missing child. The tracks led us to a towering cliff that jutted out from the forest like a giant's fist. It was a formidable sight, its sheer rock face reaching high into the sky, disappearing into a blanket of low-hanging clouds. I exchanged a glance with George, the park ranger. His seasoned gaze met mine, a look of grim understanding passing between us. The beast had taken the child up there. The thought was mind-boggling. What kind of creature could scale such a cliff, let alone with a child in tow? But the evidence was there, staring us in the face. We could see the faint impressions of the beast's claws etched into the rock face, a chilling testament to its strength and agility. As we scoured the base of the cliff, a glint of something caught my eye. Nestled among the roots of a gnarled old tree was a small shoe, its once bright colors faded and smeared with dirt. It was a child's shoe, presumably Freddie's. My heart sank. The grim reality of our situation hit us like a punch in the gut. We were too late. We knew there was nothing we could do. The boy was never found. The forest swallowed up our shouts and pleas, echoing back at us with a haunting silence. The beast had claimed another victim, leaving behind only a small shoe as a grim memento of its terrifying power. In the quiet aftermath of the search, I found myself reflecting on the case. The silence of the forest was deafening, each rustling leaf echoing the unanswered questions, the unsolved mysteries that had led me here. The missing boy, the distraught mother, the large tracks vanishing into the wilderness. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to fit, yet refused to form a coherent picture. As a newly minted agent, I had thought my system of priorities would streamline the process, a neat little method to manage the chaos. But as I stood there, staring at the small shoe, the insignificance of my system hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just about categorizing into high, mid, or low priority. It was about recognizing the unpredictable, the unknown, the unexplainable. It was about understanding that each case was unique, each victim had a story, and each monster, well, they were more real than I had ever imagined. I had come into this job with a certain view of the world, a solid belief in what was possible and what was not. But standing there, in the heart of the wilderness, I felt my convictions shatter. The world was indeed stranger, darker, more mysterious than I had ever believed. It was a tough pill to swallow, the realization that my neatly stacked system of priorities was flawed. It was a humbling experience, one that made me question my readiness, my ability to handle the unknown, but it was also a learning curve, a harsh but necessary lesson that shaped me into the agent I would become. I realized that in this line of work, you have to be ready for the unexpected, ready to let go of preconceived notions, ready to face the monsters that lurk not just in the shadows, but also in the darkest corners of our minds. I learned that in this line of work, you don't just fight the monsters outside, you also fight the ones inside, the ones that keep you up at night, whispering, "What if?" A late-night phone call jolted me awake. It was George, a senior ranger, his voice heavy with worry. One of his rangers had vanished while on the trail of a young woman, lost in the wilderness during a spring break camping trip. "I need your help, Dennis," he implored. "We need to find my guy before it's too late." I gave him my word, promising to be there by dawn. Rising from the warmth of my bed, I prepared for the journey ahead. A thermos of hot coffee was essential, a companion for the long drive and the even longer day that awaited me. Upon arriving at the national park, a sleep-deprived George greeted me. He handed me a backpack filled with supplies, and together we ventured off into the woods. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon. The air still held a crisp coldness. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't shake off a sense of foreboding. As we approached the campsite, I could see George's face pale in the early morning light. The campsite seemed to echo the dread we both felt. We scanned the area, our eyes landing on a series of small, barefoot prints imprinted in the soft earth. They led away from the campsite, disappearing into the dense forest. The strange, barefooted nature of the footprints left us with more questions than answers. We followed the footprints, their pattern leading us deeper into the encompassing forest. The trees seemed to close in around us, their shadows a stark contrast against the growing daylight. Suddenly, we stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of it, a circle of rocks surrounded a hexagram, the symbol eerily familiar. Burnt flesh tinged with a strange herbal scent lay in the center. The sight was enough to make anyone's stomach churn. I turned to George, confusion etching lines on my face. His own features were twisted in a mix of panic and disgust. He muttered something about an altar, about a woman in the woods. "A witch," he said. I couldn't believe my ears. Witches? In this day and age? I thought it was more likely the work of wayward teenagers playing a prank. But George seemed convinced otherwise. His conviction changed the tone of our search. We were no longer looking for a missing ranger and a young woman. We were looking for their remains. The reality of it was a bitter pill to swallow. We continued our search, following deep scratches etched into the tree trunks. The marks led us deeper into the forest, each one like a haunting beacon. I kept my hand close to my gun, ready for a potential bear encounter. But as we ventured further, we found something else entirely. George's face showed panic and disgust, and I could feel the chill of fear creeping up my spine. The forest was holding its breath, waiting for us to uncover its secrets. With a heavy heart, we ventured deeper into the woods, our eyes scanning the surroundings for signs of the missing ranger and young woman. The early morning light barely penetrated the dense canopy above, casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to sway with the hushed whispers of the forest. Our path was guided by the strange, deep scratches etched into the bark of the trees, like a macabre breadcrumb trail left by some unseen creature. The gnarled grooves were reminiscent of a bear's territorial markings, yet their sheer size and ferocity gave me pause. I found my hand instinctively drifting towards my gun, the cold steel a small comfort against the unknown. George was uncharacteristically quiet, his usual jovial demeanor replaced with a grim determination. His belief in the witch theory was unshaken, despite my attempts to rationalize it as the work of pranksters or a bear. The sight of that eerie altar, the hexagram and burnt flesh was etched into our minds, tainting our search with an unsettling sense of dread. As we trudged deeper into the forest, the scratches on the trees became more frequent, more brutal. It was as if we were following a path of destruction, the forest bearing the scars of a violent struggle. I could sense George's anxiety growing with each ominous marking, his eyes reflecting a mix of apprehension and resolve. Along our path, the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out as if trying to ensnare us in their grasp. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the crunch of dried leaves under our boots and our ragged breaths. The forest was holding its breath as if waiting for something, anticipating. Despite the chill, a bead of sweat trickled down my temple, my heart pounding against my ribcage. I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched, that we were not alone in these woods. My grip tightened on my gun, my senses on high alert. With each step, the forest grew denser, the silence more eerie. Our search was far from over, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that the real horror was yet to come. Suddenly, out of the brush, a figure emerged. A woman, naked, her skin pale against the dim light of the dawn, ran directly into my arms. Her body trembled with fear and cold, her eyes wild with terror. I did my best to calm her, my jacket now serving as her makeshift cloak. "George!" I called out, but he was already at my side, his gaze never leaving the woman. I could tell he was torn between staying with us and continuing his search for the missing ranger. But duty called, and with a final lingering look, he disappeared into the dense forest. As I led the woman, who managed to whisper her name, Chloe, back through the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Chloe was in shock, her body shivering from the cold, her mind seemingly miles away. I tried to get her to talk, to tell me what happened, but she only murmured incoherent words. Back at the camp, I found some clothes for Chloe. I made her a cup of hot tea, hoping the warmth would bring some color back to her cheeks and maybe loosen her tongue. But she just sat there, staring blankly into the distance, her hands wrapped tightly around the warm mug. I tried again, asking her gently about the events of the night. She looked at me, her eyes hollow, and began to speak in a hushed tone. She spoke of whispers from the forest, of a woman in a black cloak around a fire, of an uncontrollable rage and thirst. As I listened, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. I looked back towards the direction George had disappeared into, the eerie silence of the forest amplifying my growing fear. As I looked back at George, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Back at the campsite, Chloe, now clothed and sipping on hot tea, began to speak. Her voice was shaky, barely a whisper, but the words she spoke were chilling. She told me about the whispers that had drawn her deeper into the forest. Whispers that weren't just sounds, but something more. Enticing, compelling, a siren's call she couldn't ignore. She described a woman cloaked in black, standing in the heart of the forest, surrounded by darkness, save for the flickering light of a fire. The woman was chanting, her voice echoing through the trees, a haunting melody that filled the air and sent shivers down Chloe's spine. Then she spoke about the rage. It was as if a beast had awakened within her, a primal force she couldn't control. It surged through her veins, pulsing with every heartbeat, consuming her, making her feel powerful and terrified at the same time. But it was the thirst that truly frightened her, an insatiable thirst that made her feel like she was burning from the inside, a thirst that seemed to demand something more than water. As Chloe recounted her tale, her eyes seemed to lose focus, as if she was reliving the horrifying experience. Her hands trembled as she clutched the mug of tea, her knuckles white from the strain. The forest around us seemed to grow quieter as she spoke, as if the trees themselves were listening to her tale. The crackling of the fire seemed louder, the shadows cast by the flames dancing on her face, making her look even more haunted. I tried to make sense of her story, to rationalize what she was saying, but the fear in her eyes, the raw terror in her voice, it was all too real. And it made me think, could there be some truth in her words? Could there really be a witch in the forest? And had she somehow turned Chloe into something inhuman? As I listened to Chloe, I could feel a shiver run down my spine, a feeling of dread engulfing me. Suddenly I noticed a change in Chloe. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now glowed a fierce, predatory yellow. Her teeth, previously normal and human, had morphed into sharp, animalistic fangs. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the transformation unfolding before me. Out of nowhere, George burst onto the scene, his face a mask of horror. Without hesitation, he drew his gun and fired a shot at Chloe. The gunshot echoed through the forest, but it was quickly drowned out by a bone-chilling howl. It was a sound that was neither human nor animal, a sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come. Chloe, or whatever Chloe had become, bolted into the dense forest, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. We were left standing in the eerie silence, the echoes of her howl still ringing in our ears. As the echoes of Chloe's howl faded, I was left with an unsettling question. What happened to the missing ranger and Chloe? It was a cold, dark night in 1968. I was huddled over my paperwork when the phone rang. It was John, a young park ranger, his voice trembling with fear. My name is Dennis, a retired FBI agent, and this is my story. John, a rookie ranger I had met last year, sounded frantic. I had given him my number with clear instructions to call me if he ever stumbled upon anything peculiar. Tonight was that night. He was nervously recounting a tale about a senior ranger named George who had gone to investigate reports of a woman crying in the forest. As the story unfolded, the hairs on the back of my neck began to rise. John relayed how George had instructed him to stay behind and to contact me immediately if he didn't return. John's voice was shaky, the fear palpable. I could sense his anxiety, his worry for his senior ranger. I tried to reassure him, to calm his nerves. I told him to sit tight, to wait for me. I happened to be stationed only an hour away that night, so I promised to get there as quickly as I could. I was no stranger to the strange and unexplained, but something in John's voice told me that this was different. As I hung up the phone, my mind was racing. What could have happened to George? What was this crying woman in the forest? And why was John so terrified? Every fiber of my being was on high alert as I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Yet, I knew I had to help. I had to find out what was going on. I got into my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove through the dark, ominous night, the words echoed in my head. A woman crying in the forest. I had no idea what I was about to encounter, but I knew one thing for certain. I told John to sit tight. I was on my way. An hour later, I found John outside the ranger station, his face pale. I asked him to lead me to the scene. The air was heavy with tension as we made the trek to the campsite. The only sounds were the crackle of leaves under our boots and the foreboding hoots of an owl in the distance. We arrived at the campsite to find a terrified couple, their flashlight darting across the dark forest, as if they were expecting something to jump out at them. I approached them and asked about George. Their faces turned paler as they recounted their chilling encounter with a woman perched on a nearby log. A woman who, when they tried to comfort her, turned to reveal she had no face. The mere thought sent a shiver down my spine. They continued their tale, explaining how they quickly retreated and called the ranger station. When George arrived, they watched him from the safety of their tent as he approached the faceless woman. But then, she darted into the forest, and George, without a second thought, ran after her. They had no idea where he was now. I exchanged a glance with John, both of us knowing we had to find George. But this was no ordinary search mission. We were dealing with something unexplainable, something that defied all logic. I could see the fear in John's eyes, but I knew we couldn't let it paralyze us. With a stern voice, I instructed the couple to remain inside their tent. John and I ventured into the forest, torches in hand. The beam of our torches cut through the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows on the forest floor. We followed the shoe prints we assumed were George's, leading us deeper into the forest and further into the unknown. The forest was eerily quiet as we followed the trail of shoe prints. Then we found George standing alone in a clearing. The towering trees around us seemed to close in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out in the moonlight. George was stiff as a statue, his eyes reflecting the silver glow of the moon, unblinking, staring into the depths of the forest. "George! George!" I shouted, but it was like he was in another world. His trance was so deep, so impenetrable, he could have been a wax figure in a museum display. We approached him cautiously, the leaves crunching under our feet. I put my hand on his shoulder, his body cold and rigid. I gave him a firm shake, and finally he snapped back to reality. His eyes, once vacant, now filled with terror. "We need to get out of here," he managed to whisper, his voice barely audible over the whispering wind. "It's not safe." Before we could ask him what he meant, a giggle echoed around us. It was a chilling sound, a woman's giggle, but twisted, warped into something that sent shivers down our spines. It was as if the forest itself was laughing at us. We froze, the sound bouncing off the trees, enveloping us from all sides. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from. The giggle turned into a cackle, a mocking sound that filled the air. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a chill running down my spine. We were not alone in this forest, and whatever was out there with us was not friendly. George's words echoed in my ears. "It's not safe." And then we ran. We bolted through the forest, the trees blurring past us, the woman's giggle following us, taunting us. We didn't know where we were heading, but we knew we had to get away, away from the eerie laughter, away from the trance, away from the forest. The giggling echoed around us, growing louder and more sinister with each step we took. The sound was not of joy, but rather a macabre jest, a predator toying with its prey. It was the woman, her laughter now turning into a bone-chilling screech that pierced the night. Dennis, John, and George found themselves ensnared in the heart-stopping race with an unseen terror. The forest around us was no longer a tranquil sanctuary. It had transformed into an ominous labyrinth, the shadows stretching and contorting with each passing moment. We were running, our breaths ragged, our hearts pounding against our chests. Each rustling leaf, each snapping twig seemed to be the woman, her presence ubiquitous yet invisible. Suddenly, the forest's snaking tendrils opened up to reveal a path, the exit, safety. But the sight that met our eyes froze us in our tracks. The woman was there, waiting for us. Her silhouette against the moonlit opening, she was no longer an elusive specter but a tangible figure, a malevolent entity barring our escape. The woman's silhouette began to alter, her body dropping down, her limbs contorting in a grotesque dance of shadows. The sight was terrifying, a nightmare unfolding in front of our eyes. The sounds of cracking joints filled the silence, each snap a cruel symphony resonating with our escalating fear. We stood anchored, our eyes transfixed on the woman's contorting figure. The terror had its icy grip around our hearts, the reality of our predicament sinking in. We were trapped, the woman standing between us and our escape, her laughter now replaced with an eerie silence that was just as menacing. The woman was no longer a distant threat, but a palpable danger. Her twisted form a testament to the horror that had been chasing us. She was a shadow brought to life, a chilling reminder of the fear that had been gnawing at us since our encounter at the campsite. We froze in our tracks, the woman's silhouette contorting in front of us. The shadows were no longer just the absence of light, but a horrifying entity, a chilling spectacle that had us trapped in its macabre embrace. I pulled out my gun, my hand trembling. The woman rushed towards us, her body contorting in ways that were humanly impossible. Her joints snapped, her body twisted and turned, as if none of the laws of biology applied to her. She was a nightmarish figure that seemed to have leaped straight out of a horror story, her eerie giggle still echoing in the chilling night air. I steadied my trembling hand, my focus narrowing down to the woman. The forest around us seemed to fade into oblivion, the only sound being the frantic beating of my heart. My finger found the trigger, squeezing it gently as I prepared to do what had to be done. The deafening sound of the gunshot filled the night, followed by another and another. Each shot seemed to echo around the forest, the sound ricocheting off the trees. The woman stumbled, my bullets finding their mark. She fell to the ground, her body lying still amidst the fallen leaves. She was no longer the terrifying creature that had chased us through the forest, her body no longer contorting in that horrifying manner. We approached her cautiously, the fear still lingering in our hearts. Turning her over, we braced ourselves for the faceless horror we had expected to see. But to our surprise, it was a normal face that met our gaze, a face that had no traces of the terror it had instilled in us. Her joints were normal, her body showing no signs of the contortions we had witnessed. The faceless woman, the creature that had hunted us in the forest, was gone. In her place was a regular woman, her body lifeless and devoid of any signs of the horror we had just experienced. It was as if the nightmare had ended as abruptly as it had begun. I looked at John and George, their faces mirroring my confusion. The faceless woman was gone, leaving behind only a chilling memory. A typical day at the FBI office was interrupted when I, Dennis, was summoned by my senior manager, Joe. He laid out a high-profile case in front of me, a case that would take me deep into the heart of the country's wilderness. The subject of this case was Jacob, a young man with a silver spoon in his mouth and a penchant for adrenaline. He was a trust fund kid who, in between sipping cocktails on yachts and jet-setting across the globe, developed a taste for extreme sports and experiences. Jacob, it seems, had decided to swap his designer gear for a rucksack and hiking boots, and embarked on a journey into the wild. His destination was a well-known national park, a rugged and untamed expanse of nature that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. But Jacob was not one to be deterred by such trivialities. He was, after all, a man who sought thrill and adventure, a man who believed he could conquer anything. Yet it was in this wilderness that Jacob disappeared, like a drop of water in the ocean. His last known location was deep within the forest, a place where the trees whispered secrets to the wind and the sun barely peeked through the dense canopy. It was a place that held a sense of foreboding, a place where man was not the apex predator. The news of Jacob's disappearance sent ripples through the echelons of society. A young man at the prime of his life, vanishing without a trace, was not a matter to be taken lightly. The case was handed over to the FBI, and I was chosen to find Jacob, to bring him back from the wilderness. Even as I sat in my office pondering over the case files, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something about this case didn't sit right with me, but as an agent, it was my duty to follow through, to chase after the shadows until the truth was revealed. With a sigh, I embarked on the 4-hour drive to the national park. Upon arrival, I checked in with the ranger's office, where I met a young woman named Katie. Her features were hardened by the wilderness, yet her eyes held a spark of youthful energy. Katie was a seasoned ranger, well-versed in the unpredictable ways of the forest. She briefed me on Jacob's intended hiking route, a challenging trail that wound its way deep into the heart of the national park. Jacob, it seemed, was no stranger to the thrill of extreme sports. He had set off on this daring journey armed with an impressive array of gear and supplies. Yet it was clear that his enthusiasm for adventure had far outstripped his knowledge of survival. Katie and I, both experienced in the ways of the wilderness, knew the dangers that lurked within the forest shadows. We agreed that time was of the essence. Every minute lost was a minute closer to nightfall, and nightfall in the forest was not a place for the unprepared. We decided to set off immediately, harnessing the remaining daylight to our advantage. The park's terrain was as ruthless as it was breathtaking. We navigated through rugged trails, our quad bikes eating up the miles beneath us. We ventured as deep into the forest as the path allowed, the dense undergrowth eventually halting our mechanical steeds. There was a certain stillness that hung in the air, a silence that the bustling city could never comprehend. It was both eerie and beautiful, a silence that whispered of hidden secrets and untold stories. But we were not there to admire the scenery. We were there to find Jacob. As the quad bike engines died down, the forest seemed to close in around us, a vast living entity that held us in its grip. We could go no further on wheels. The remainder of the journey would have to be made on foot, a trek into the heart of the wild. We had no choice but to venture into the unknown, guided only by our instincts and the fading daylight. We got as close as we could by quad bike, then we had to make the rest of the journey on foot. Our steps were measured, our senses alert, as we delved deeper into the forest's embrace. Little did we know the true horror was yet to come. After about 40 minutes of hiking, we arrived at our destination, only to find that Jacob wasn't there. The silence of the forest was punctuated by the unsettling crack of broken branches underfoot, leading us deeper into the wilderness. We were in uncharted territory now, the path unwinding into an eerie labyrinth of shadow and foliage. The broken branches seemed to whisper a chilling tale of panic and flight, a breadcrumb trail of fear etched into the wilderness. Each snapped twig and crushed leaf heightened the sense of dread knotting in my stomach. This was no ordinary lost hiker scenario. The forest seemed to hold its breath, its secrets hidden amongst the dense undergrowth and towering trees. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, monstrous shadows that danced and flickered with every rustle of the wind. I decided to go a little further down the path while Katie headed back to call for reinforcements. As I ventured further, I stumbled upon a grisly sight. Jacob's backpack, filled with his gear and supplies. The backpack had been discarded, its contents strewn about haphazardly as if in a rush. This was not the sign of a thrill seeker, but of someone in desperate fear. Moving forward, my eyes caught something in the distance. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached. The sight before me was one of pure horror. It was Jacob, lying face down on the ground. His back was torn open, revealing a gruesome view of his innards. But the wounds were not what you would expect from a wild animal attack. They were clean, almost surgical. His organs appeared to have been removed with precision, not torn out in a frenzy. It was as though the handiwork of a skilled surgeon had been performed in the heart of this dense forest. The body was still warm, an unsettling indication that whatever had done this was still near. A chill ran down my spine as I looked around the quiet forest. An eerie silence had fallen, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then the unmistakable sound of twigs crunching underfoot echoed in the distance. I wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched intensified, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. In that moment, I understood that I was not the hunter in these woods, but potentially the hunted. Drawing my pistol, I cautiously approached the source of the noise. The forest was thick here, shadows playing tricks on my eyes. I could see something, but it was indistinct, almost as if the light was bending around it. The figure darted out of sight before I could get a clear look. In that moment, I knew I was dealing with something far beyond the ordinary. This was not the work of a man, but something far more sinister. The forest held a secret, a predator unseen and deadly, and it was watching me. As I moved closer, I noticed something peculiar, almost as if the light was bending around something. It was like a mirage, the kind you see on the horizon on a sweltering summer day. My senses sharpened, my heart pounded in my chest, and a chill ran down my spine. It was then that I saw it, a figure, or what seemed like one, darting out of sight so quickly It was as if it had vanished into thin air. I couldn't make out any distinct features. It was like trying to describe a shadow in the pitch black of night. But its speed was alarming, and for some reason, I knew in my gut that pursuing it would have been a grave mistake. There was an eerie feeling, a profound sense of dread that washed over me. It was like being a mouse under the gaze of a hawk. I was certain that this thing, whatever it was, could have killed me without breaking a sweat. It's not a feeling I'll ever forget. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a bright light streaking across the sky. It moved with a purpose, a determined trajectory, and then it stopped. Suspended in the air above where the figure had vanished, it shot a beam down to the ground, illuminating the forest in an otherworldly glow. The beam lasted for a brief moment, and then the light shot off into the sky, disappearing as swiftly as it had appeared. As I made my way back to the top, the adrenaline coursing through my veins began to subside, replaced by a sense of unease. The forest, once a place of tranquility and beauty, now felt like a hunting ground. I felt like an intruder in a game of cat and mouse, only this time I was the mouse. The unsettling feeling that something was horribly wrong clung to me like a second skin, and as I left the forest that day, I knew I had encountered an unseen predator. Returning to the ranger's office, I was left with more questions than answers. The gruesome sight of Jacob's body, the precision of his wounds, and that mysterious light in the sky all painted a picture too complex to decipher. Could it be a serial killer with surgical skills, hiding in the wilderness? The precision of the wounds suggested a human hand, but the brutality of the attack was animalistic. Or was it a strange, unknown creature of the forest capable of such violence? Yet, no known animal could cause such precise injuries. Or was it something even more unexplainable, something beyond our comprehension? The strange light overhead and the feeling of being watched, it all pointed towards something otherworldly. Every possible explanation seemed as unlikely as the next, leaving me in a maze of uncertainty. But whatever it was still out there, waiting in the darkness of the forest. It's not often an entire family goes missing, but when I got the call, I knew we had a case unlike any other. When I, retired FBI agent Dennis, was informed about a family disappearing into the forest, a shiver ran down my spine. This was far from typical. An entire family vanishing without a trace was a rarity, even in my line of work. Upon arriving at the scene, the mystery deepened. A young ranger named John escorted me to the family's last known location, a seemingly ordinary campsite, nestled amidst the towering trees. But something wasn't right. The footprints scattered around the site told a perplexing story. Two sets of small footprints led into the heart of the forest, presumably belonging to the children of the missing family. However, there was no trace of any adult footprints. It was as if the parents had vanished into thin air, with only their children wandering into the woods. The forest was eerily silent, except for a strange, distant melody that seemed to be carried on the wind. It sounded like a song, accompanied by the soft lilt of flutes. An odd occurrence, but we couldn't ignore the possibility that it might be the missing children. So, with a sense of trepidation and a dash of hope, we decided to follow the footprints and the strange melody deeper into the forest. As we ventured further, the forest grew darker and the melody grew louder. The footprints continued to lead us on, disappearing into the dense foliage. The mystery of the missing family was unfolding like a cryptic puzzle, each piece more baffling than the last. But there was no turning back now. We were committed to unraveling this enigma, driven by our duty and a growing sense of unease. With the strange melody echoing around us and the footprints guiding our path, we stepped deeper into the forest, unsure of what we would find. The forest seemed to close in around us, swallowing us into its enigmatic depths. We had no choice but to follow the footprints into the forest. The journey into the unknown had just begun. As we ventured deeper into the forest, we could hear very strange noises, almost like singing and the sound of flutes. The rhythmic, eerie melody seemed to be leading us, pulling us deeper into the heart of the woodland. It was like the forest itself was whispering to us, guiding our steps through the underbrush and the towering trees. We followed the bewitching sound, each step taking us further into the mystery of the missing family. The children's footprints were our only tangible guide, but the ethereal music was our compass, leading us to a clearing. A solitary tree stood in the middle, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal arms. But the strangest part was the tiny crack at its base. as if it was a doorway to another world. The enchanting music seemed to emanate from this peculiar aperture, growing louder as we approached. But as we neared, a blinding light burst forth from the tree, engulfing us in its brilliance. The world spun around me, the forest blurred, and I felt my consciousness slip away as if seized by the forest itself. When I woke up, I was alone. The forest was eerily silent. The enchanting music was gone. The light had dissipated, leaving behind a chilling darkness. I called out for John, my voice echoing through the dense forest, but there was no response. All that was left of him were his footprints, leading up to where we had collapsed, then back to the crack in the base of the tree. I was alone, surrounded by the unknown. The forest, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien and hostile. I had no choice but to retreat, to regroup and figure out what had happened. But even as I left, I could feel the forest watching me, its whispering leaves rustling like a low murmur. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was not right. Something was lurking in the shadows. As I made my way back, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was leaving something behind, something crucial. The forest held a secret that had swallowed an entire family and my fellow ranger, and I was determined to uncover it. When I woke up, I was alone. It was far outside my comfort zone, so I called my boss. I explained the situation, my voice shaking slightly. My boss, Joe, listened in silence before finally urging me to return to the ranger station and wait. "Wait for who?" I asked, but he simply replied, "You'll know when you see them." As I sat at the ranger station, a man arrived. His attire was ordinary, but the stern set of his jaw and the sharpness in his eyes screamed military. I shared the story, my words stumbling over each other in their haste to spill out. He listened, his gaze never wavering. "Show me," he said simply, and without another word, we were on our way. The forest seemed to hold its breath as we moved deeper into its heart. I warned him about the strange tree, the eerie sounds, the blinding light, but he only nodded, his focus unwavering. We ventured back into the forest, this time aiming for the strange tree. As we got closer to the tree, we heard it again, almost like childish whispers echoing throughout the forest. The whispers seemed to dance on the wind, a haunting melody that was both enchanting and disquieting. The source seemed to be the tree, or more specifically, the small crack at its base. Suddenly, a tiny figure emerged from the tree. It was a man, but unlike any man we had ever seen. He was small, about the height of a toddler, with a long, pointed hat that was out of proportion with his body. His eyes twinkled with a mischievous light as he looked at us. For a moment, we were frozen, our minds grappling to make sense of what we were seeing. Was this a gnome, a creature of folklore and fairy tales? It seemed too absurd to be real, and yet there he was. Before we could react, the tiny man darted off into the forest. His movements were quick and agile, like a squirrel scampering up a tree. We tried to follow him, our eyes straining to keep track of his small form as he disappeared into the undergrowth. But it was no use. Within moments, he was gone, swallowed up by the forest. Feeling a mix of confusion and frustration, we decided to head back to the tree. The forest seemed to hum with anticipation. The sense of being watched had returned, more intense than before. It was as though the forest itself was alive, watching us, whispering our names. When we returned to the tree, we found John unconscious on the ground. His face was pale, his breath shallow. We felt a chill run down our spines. What had happened here? What had John seen? And where were the children? The forest seemed to whisper back, its secrets hidden among the trees. I put John over my shoulder and dragged him back to the ranger station. The weight of the young man was a burden my aging body protested against. Each step was a testament to the unyielding will of duty, each breath a silent prayer for the children we hoped to find. Under the watchful eyes of the ancient trees, our journey back seemed longer, more treacherous. The forest, once familiar, now felt alien, its whispers filled with secrets we couldn't decipher. As the ranger station finally came into view, relief washed over me. But the absence of the military man gnawed at my nerves, his absence an ominous sign. I laid John down gently, his face ashen against the backdrop of the setting sun. Time seemed to stretch, each tick of the clock echoing in the silence of the station. I brewed a pot of coffee, its rich aroma a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere. Just as the moon began its ascent, John stirred. His eyes fluttered open, confusion etched on his features. I handed him a mug of coffee, its warmth a comforting presence in the midst of our predicament. I asked him about what happened, hoping his account would shed light on the mystery. His voice, soft and distant, painted a picture of a beautiful woodland. He described a landscape bathed in a glow that wasn't of this world, a place that filled his heart with an inexplicable joy. His words, though fragmented and vague, conveyed a sense of peace that seemed at odds with our grim situation. He didn't remember much, but his story left us with more questions than answers. As the night wore on, we sat in silence, the echoes of John's tale lingering in the air. The forest outside, under the silver glow of the moon, remained a silent witness to our plight, its secrets locked away in the heart of the woods. The mystery of the missing family remained unsolved. Our encounter with the peculiar tree and the uncanny creature had only deepened the enigma. We had ventured deep into the forest, drawn by the lure of strange noises, only to be met with more questions than answers. The footprints, the inexplicable disappearance of John, the bright light, and the elusive gnome-like figure had all left us grasping at straws. We were left with an enigma, a puzzle with pieces that just wouldn't fit. The forest, with its whispering winds and eerie silence, seemed to hold the answers we sought. Yet it remained tight-lipped, guarding its secrets with an inscrutable stillness. The mystery lingered, echoing in the rustling leaves and the hushed whispers of the forest, leaving us yearning for answers that remained just out of reach. In the end, we were left with the chilling realization that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Sometimes the forest keeps its secrets. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the phone rang. It was the sheriff from Oak Haven, a small town bordering an age-old forest. The sheriff's voice was strained and distraught as he relayed the grim news of a missing child. A 6-year-old boy named Tommy had vanished into the dense wilderness during a camping trip with his father. The boy's disappearance had sent ripples of dread throughout the small community, and the sheriff, an old friend of mine, was calling for my help. As an FBI agent, I had seen my fair share of chilling cases, yet this one seemed different, carrying an undertone of something ancient and malevolent. The forest, a sprawling expanse of towering trees and thick undergrowth, had always been shrouded in local folklore and tales of strange occurrences. Now it seemed it had swallowed up a child. I could hear the desperation in the sheriff's voice as he spoke. "Dennis, we need your help. Tommy's been gone for hours, and it's getting dark." His words resonated with me. I had heard stories about the Oak Haven forest. It was said to be a place of timeless beauty, yet it was also a place many feared. Legends spoke of its uncanny ability to confound those who ventured too deep into its heart. The forest seemed to have a life of its own, a consciousness that was indifferent, if not hostile, to those who dared to intrude upon its solitude. The sheriff's request was not one I could refuse, not only because he was an old friend, but because a child's life was at stake. I could sense the gravity of the situation. The forest was closing in and time was running out for little Tommy. "I'm on my way," I told the sheriff, my voice steady despite the chilling dread that had begun to seep into my bones. There was no time to lose. The forest waited, its ancient secrets hidden amongst the shadows of the towering trees. I immediately packed my bag and drove towards Oak Haven. The grim call had been made, and it was a call I could not ignore. In Oak Haven, I met with Park Ranger John, a seasoned ranger who knew the forest like the back of his hand. John was a man of few words, but his reputation preceded him. He had spent a lifetime amidst the towering trees and winding trails of Oak Haven Forest, developing an uncanny intuition for the woodlands that was second to none. John was an intriguing character, a blend of stoic wisdom and rugged individuality. His eyes held a glint of wilderness, and his weather-worn face was a testament to the countless hours he had spent under the canopy of Oak Haven. His calm and steady demeanor provided a sense of reassurance to me, as I knew we were venturing into a place that was as mysterious as it was daunting. As we prepared to enter the forest, John equipped himself with his trusted flashlight and a compass that looked as old as the forest itself. He moved with a purpose, his every action radiating confidence. It was clear that he was in his element, and his presence was a comforting constant amidst the uncertainty that lay ahead. We began our journey into Oak Haven Forest, with John leading the way. His footsteps were steady and sure, navigating the labyrinthine paths with an ease that left me in awe. As we delved deeper into the forest, John's familiarity with the terrain became evident. He knew every tree, every trail, every hidden nook and cranny of Oak Haven. He spoke little, but His silence was not uncomfortable. On the contrary, it felt like a respectful hush, a quiet homage to the ancient grandeur of the forest. In his silence, I could sense his profound connection with the forest, his deep respect for its untamed beauty, and his awareness of its hidden dangers. As we ventured deeper, the forest seemed to respond to John's presence. It was as if the trees recognized him, the trails welcomed him, and the very air acknowledged his authority. It was a strange, almost mystical connection, one that was both baffling and fascinating. With John leading the way, we ventured into the heart of Oak Haven Forest. We were in search of a missing child, but we were also delving into a mystery that was as old as the forest itself. Unbeknownst to us, the forest was waiting, ready to reveal its secrets in the most unexpected ways. As we trekked deeper into the forest, we stumbled upon peculiar markers, twisted branches, and stones arranged in an eerie pattern. The forest seemed to thrum with a quiet energy, its ancient roots whispering untold stories under our feet. John paused, his gaze lingering over the markers. His usual calm demeanor shifted, replaced with a seriousness that sent a chill down my spine. He reached out, his fingers tracing the unusual pattern, twisted and unnatural. His eyes were distant, as if he was trying to decipher a hidden message. "These are not ordinary markers," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The locals believe that these are warning signs." "Warning signs?" I echoed, my curiosity piqued. "Warnings for what?" John didn't reply immediately. He seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the markers. "The forest," he finally said, his voice carrying a note of caution. "People say it's alive, that it has a mind of its own, it doesn't like intruders." His words hung in the air, and an unsettling silence followed. The forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows growing darker, the silence more profound. I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that we were being watched, that the forest was indeed alive and aware of our presence. I thought of the missing boy, of the fear and confusion he must be feeling. We had to find him, to bring him back to his family. I looked at John, his face etched with a determination that mirrored my own. "Let's keep going," I said, my voice steady despite the unease brewing within me. John nodded and we pushed forward, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, our voices echoing through the silent forest as we called out for Tommy. Despite the unsettling warning signs and John's ominous words, we pressed on, calling out for Tommy. The forest seemed to hold its breath as we delved deeper into its heart, the shadows growing longer, the silence more profound. The unknown awaited us, but we had a mission to complete, a child to find. And so, we ventured forth into the heart of Oak Haven Forest. The deeper we went into the forest, the more intense the silence became. It was as if even the wind had decided to hold its breath, creating a vacuum of sound that was both eerie and disconcerting. The only noise that broke through the silence was the occasional crunch of leaves under our feet, the hushed whispers of our voices, and the distant hooting of an owl. Each sound seemed to echo through the forest, amplifying the sense of isolation that was beginning to creep up on us. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, an endless maze of towering trees and overgrown paths that seemed to stretch on forever. The air grew colder and a chilling wind cut through the silence, causing the trees to shudder and the leaves to rustle. I could see my breath fogging up in the beam of my flashlight, and I pulled my coat tighter around myself, attempting to ward off the biting cold. Despite the disquieting silence and the dropping temperature, we continued our search. We called out for Tommy, our voices echoing through the forest, but there was no response. The silence was so intense it felt like a physical presence, pressing down on us, making it harder to breathe. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the unsettling markers became more frequent. The twisted branches and oddly arranged stones seemed to be leading us somewhere. But where that was, I couldn't tell. The forest was a puzzle, a mystery that seemed to grow deeper the further we ventured into it. The silence was oppressive, a haunting reminder of Tommy's disappearance. The forest seemed to be closing in on us, the towering trees casting long, menacing shadows that danced in the beam of our flashlights. The forest was alive, and it was watching us. Every instinct in my body was telling me that something was wrong, that we were not alone in this forest, that we were being watched. But we had to find Tommy. We had to keep going. As the forest grew even darker and colder, I couldn't shake off the sense of impending dread. Suddenly, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as though we were being watched. The forest had always been quiet, but now it was as if the very trees had ceased their whispering. The wind had stopped its ghostly whistling, and the creatures had retreated into the shadows, leaving us alone with the oppressive silence. The only sounds that remained were our own breaths, heavy with the weight of dread, and the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. Our flashlights seemed to dim, their beams swallowed by the inky darkness that surrounded us. The forest was alive, and I could feel its unseen eyes upon us, watching, waiting, studying our every move. John, who had been leading the way, suddenly halted. His flashlight dropped from his hand and rolled away, casting eerie shadows as it spun. He stood frozen, his eyes wide, and his face pale. I tried to ask him what was wrong, but my voice seemed to be stuck, as if the forest had stolen it away. The air turned colder, so much so that I could see my breath misting in the flashlight's beam. It was as if an icy hand had reached out from the forest's depths, brushing against my skin and sending shivers down my spine. I could feel the forest's unseen presence growing stronger, its silent gaze piercing through the darkness and into my very soul. I wanted to run, to escape the forest's watchful gaze and the chilling cold that seemed to seep into my bones. But I knew we couldn't leave. Not without Tommy. My thoughts turned to the missing boy, and I felt a surge of determination. We had to find him. I reached out and grabbed John's arm, shaking him out of his trance. "John," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to keep moving." But John didn't respond. He stood there, his gaze fixed on something in the darkness, something I couldn't see. I turned to John, only to find him staring into the darkness, his face as white as a sheet. We reached a clearing. The moonlight, pale and eerie, spilled across the landscape, casting long, unsettling shadows. In the center of this clearing, an oddity caught our eyes. It was a doll, handcrafted and crude, made from twigs and leaves. Its eyes were button-like, staring blankly into the night, and its hair was made of twine. The doll bore an uncanny resemblance to a child, its form twisted and contorted in an unnerving manner. The sight of the doll sent chills down my spine, a shiver of foreboding that seemed to echo through the silent forest. John, ever the stoic, was visibly shaken. His voice trembled as he murmured, This is not right. It's a warning." The doll, the childlike figure formed of nature's scraps, was a message, a chilling premonition of what lay ahead. It was a symbol, a sign that we were treading on ground that didn't belong to us. Yet, despite the fear gnawing at our insides, we knew we couldn't turn back. We had a mission, a duty to find Tommy, and we couldn't let this ominous sign deter us. With our hearts pounding and our resolve steeled, we ventured deeper into Oak Haven. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees whispering secrets in the wind, the leaves rustling in an unsettling symphony of nature's warnings. Yet we pressed on, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, our determination unwavering. The deeper we delved into the forest, the further we seemed to drift from the world we knew. The forest of Oak Haven was a realm of its own, a place where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural seemed blurred. The sense of unease grew stronger with each passing moment, the forest's eerie ambience seeping into our bones. Despite the ominous warning, we continued our search for Tommy, the doll's haunting image etched in our minds. The forest's secrets seemed to echo around us, whispering tales of the unknown. But we were undeterred. We had a mission, and we wouldn't let fear stand in our way. This is not right. It's a warning." John's words echoed in my mind as we plunged further into the depths of Oak Haven. The forest's chilling warning, a constant reminder of the danger that lay ahead. Hours turned into an eternity, and exhaustion threatened to overtake us. The eerie silence of the forest was only broken by the crunching of leaves under our boots and the rustling of the wind through the trees. Then, as if a faint beacon in the dark, we heard it. A distant cry, a child's voice calling for help. It was Tommy. Our hearts pounded in our chests as we pushed through the underbrush, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. The cries led us to a small, overgrown clearing, and there, in the center, stood Tommy. His small form was trembling, his eyes wide with fear. The sight of him, so small and vulnerable, was a piercing contrast to the overwhelming darkness around us. Relief washed over us, a brief respite in this nightmarish ordeal. But this relief was short-lived. As we approached Tommy, we noticed his gaze was not on us. His eyes were fixed on something beyond us, something in the shadows. The air grew cold. The forest hushed as if holding its breath. An ominous presence filled the clearing, chilling our bones and causing the hairs on the back of our necks to stand on end. We turned to see what had captured the boys' attention, and were met with a sight that would forever be etched in our nightmares. Emerging from the shadows of the trees were figures, tall and gaunt, their faces hidden in darkness. They moved with an unsettling grace, their steps eerily silent. The moonlight seemed to shy away from them, casting their forms in an even deeper obscurity. The realization hit us like a cold wave. These were not ordinary beings. They were something much more ancient, much more malevolent. They were the spirits of Oakhaven, the guardians of this cursed forest, and we, intruders in their realm, had just caught their attention. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their steps eerily silent. This was the chilling realization we had as we stood, paralyzed by fear, in the heart of Oakhaven. The figures emerging from the forest shadows were not ordinary beings. Their tall, gaunt forms were shrouded in darkness, their faces obscured, but their presence was as palpable as the night air itself. These were the spirits of Oakhaven, entities as ancient as the forest they guarded. Their existence, woven into the very fabric of the woods, was a tale passed down through generations, a legend we had dismissed as mere folklore. But standing there, in their ominous presence, the truth became horrifyingly clear. These were not myths or ghost stories. These were the forest's guardians, its protectors, its ancient spirits. As they drew nearer, the air grew denser, heavy with their presence. The forest itself seemed to respond to them, the trees twisting and writhing in an eerie dance, leaves rustling in a chorus of whispers that echoed through the stillness. It was as if the forest was alive, breathing in rhythm with these spectral beings, its heartbeat pulsing with an ominous cadence that gripped us with an overwhelming sense of dread. The spirits surrounded us, their silence more terrifying than any sound. The only noise was the pounding of our hearts and the shallow, ragged breaths we dared to take. We were intruders in their realm, a fact made horrifyingly clear by their unwavering gaze. They were the true masters of Oakhaven, and we were mere trespassers, caught in their haunting vigil. The weight of their gaze was a clear message, a warning that echoed louder than any words. We were not welcome here. This was their domain, their sanctuary. They were the spirits of Oakhaven, the protectors of the forest, and we had trespassed on sacred ground. Fear clung to us like a second skin, a chilling reminder of the peril we were in. But beneath the fear was a determination, a resolve that hardened with every beat of our hearts. We had to escape, to find a way out of this ancient, cursed forest. As we stood there, surrounded by the spirits, one thing was clear. I knew that we were not welcome there. Tommy's cries had ceased, replaced by a haunting silence. I turned to John, and we shared a look of grim resolution. The spirits, embodiments of the ancient forest, were closing in, their presence palpable in the air around us. The time for action was now. We had to escape. Without a word, we took off, our flashlights slicing through the oppressive darkness. The forest came alive around us, the whispers of the spirits chasing us, echoing through the undergrowth. They seemed to be everywhere, their ethereal forms flitting between trees, their whispers like a chilling wind at our backs. But we didn't look back. We couldn't. We ran, our hearts pounding in our chests, the fear of the unknown fueling our desperate dash for freedom. Tommy was with us, his small hand clutching mine tightly. His fear was palpable, but he was brave, keeping up with our pace without a word of complaint. We were his only hope, and he was our motivation, the reason we were risking everything. We had to get him out of this haunted forest, away from the malevolent spirits of Oakhaven. The forest seemed endless, an eternity of shadows and whispers, but we didn't let it deter us. We ran, our breaths ragged, our muscles screaming in protest, but we couldn't afford to slow down. We kept going, the ominous presence of the spirits a constant reminder of the danger lurking behind us. And then, just when we thought we couldn't go any further, we saw it. A thinning of the trees, the faintest hint of moonlight filtering through, the edge of the forest. We pushed on, our last reserves of strength propelling us towards the light. The spirits were still behind us, their haunting whispers gradually fading as we left their domain. We didn't stop until we were clear of the forest, until we could no longer feel their oppressive presence. We reached the forest's edge, where the shadows receded, and the malevolent presence gave way to the light of the moon. We were free. But as we looked back at the dark expanse of Oakhaven Forest, we knew we would never forget the night we escaped its haunted depths. In the heart of the dense, shadowy forest, I was on the trail of a serial kidnapper who had been eluding the authorities for years. The moon, peeking through the thick canopy of trees, cast an eerie glow on the forest floor, making the shadows dance like specters in the night. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. I'm Special Agent Dennis, retired now, but back then I was deep in the wilderness, pursuing a case that had haunted the Bureau for far too long. The kidnapper's elusive nature had led me away from the bustling city streets and into the heart of the forest, a place where even the trees seemed to whisper warnings of the danger that lay ahead. The clues had pointed me towards a small, secluded cabin nestled deep within the forest, a place so remote that it was almost swallowed by the surrounding wilderness. This was the alleged hideout of the kidnapper, a place where no one would dare to venture, a place where evil had found a home amidst the serene beauty of nature. The forest seemed to come alive as I neared the cabin, the rustling leaves sounding like hushed whispers, the distant calls of the nocturnal creatures echoing like ghostly warnings in the still night. The moonlight filtering through the dense foliage cast an unsettling glow on the cabin, making it seem even more sinister. I could feel a chill run down my spine as I approached the cabin, a sense of dread washing over me. It felt as though the forest was holding its breath, the once whispering leaves falling silent, the nocturnal creatures retreating into the shadows. It was as if the forest itself was aware of the horrors concealed within the cabin and was warning me of the terror that awaited. Every step towards the cabin felt like a step towards an abyss of unknown terrors. The silence was almost unbearable, the anticipation of the horrors that lay ahead threatening to consume me. But I had a mission to accomplish, a kidnapper to apprehend, and possibly a life to save. As I approached the cabin, a bone-chilling feeling gripped me. It was as though the forest itself was warning me of the horrors that awaited. I instinctively drew my weapon, slowly pushing the cabin's creaky door open. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of damp wood and a mix of something else, something far more sinister. The remnants of the day's light struggled to pierce through the grime-streaked windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and flickered in the gloom. As I ventured further into the belly of the cabin, the sense of dread grew stronger. It was like stepping into the lair of a beast, the air thick with the anticipation of the unknown. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional groan of the old wooden structure, a ghostly lament in the stillness of the night. In the dim light, I could make out a small, grimy room. The sight that met my eyes was something no amount of training could have prepared me for. Huddled in the corner was a child, a grotesque figure barely recognizable as human. Its clothes were tattered rags, its face smeared with grime and what looked disturbingly like blood. The child's eyes glowed with an unnatural feral light, and its hair was matted and wild. Its gaze was focused on a shapeless mass in its hands, tearing at it with a savage intensity that was chilling to witness. I felt my heart hammering in my chest as I took in the scene, the horrifying realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. This was no ordinary child. This was a creature born of unimaginable horrors, a reflection of the monstrous individual who had stolen it away from the safety of its home. As the reality of the situation sank in, I knew I had to tread carefully. This child, this feral creature, was just as much a victim as the ones who had not survived. Its trust, if it could be won at all, would not come easily. I had to remember that behind the wild, animalistic exterior was a child who had been subjected to unspeakable cruelty. The child's eyes glowed with an unnatural feral light, and its hair was matted and wild. The child was devouring something unidentifiable, tearing it apart with a primal ferocity. The sight that greeted me was horrifying. In the dim light of the cabin, I could make out a small form huddled in the corner, its movements wild and erratic. The child, no more than 10 years old, was a grotesque sight. Its clothes were ragged and torn, barely covering its thin, wiry frame. Its hair was a stark contrast to its pale, dirt-streaked skin, but what struck me the most were its eyes, glowing with an unnatural light. They held a chilling mix of fear, defiance, and something far more predatory. The remnants of a half-devoured creature lay at its feet. This was the kidnapped child I had been searching for, now a wild being molded by years of torment and deprivation. It emitted a growl, exposing teeth stained with gore. The sound, so devoid of humanity, sent shivers down my spine. The child hissed, its voice a chilling whisper in the silence of the cabin. "You, not mine to eat." The words, though barely coherent, were a clear warning. Forced to survive in a world of darkness and depravity, this child had been turned into a beast. Yet in its eyes I saw a glimmer of something else, a flicker of the child it once was, buried deep beneath the layers of savagery. This was just the beginning of a long harrowing to rescue this child from its monstrous existence and help it reclaim its stolen childhood. I knew I had to tread carefully. This was not a normal criminal. This was a primal, ruthless being that had been molded by years of brutality. The challenge of gaining Emily's trust was like nothing I had ever faced. This was not a case of good versus evil, but a battle against the horrors of a stolen childhood. Each day my approach was slow and measured. I started by leaving food outside the cabin, trying to show her that I was not a threat, but a source of safety and sustenance. I would sit at a safe distance, talking softly to her, telling her stories of a world beyond the forest, of a life where she would be safe, loved, and cared for. There were setbacks, of course, moments when Emily would lash out, her fear and confusion manifesting as aggression, but I didn't let that deter me. I understood that her reactions were not a reflection of her true self, but of the atrocities she had been subjected to. With each passing day, I could see small changes. The wild look in her eyes started to soften. She began accepting food from my hand, her growls subsiding into wary silence. I continued to speak to her, my voice a constant soothing presence, a stark contrast to the harsh world she had known. This was a test of endurance, of patience, and of courage, but above all it was a test of humanity. The strength of the human spirit, its capacity for resilience and adaptability, was being put to the ultimate test. This was a child who had been forced to become a beast, and it was my mission to help her reclaim her humanity. The rescue was not a single heroic act, but a series of small victories. Each step forward was a triumph, a testament to the power of compassion and perseverance. It was an arduous journey, but one that was worth every effort, every struggle. I brought food and warmth, slowly chipping away at the feral facade, and with each passing day, I could see Emily emerging from the shell of the creature she had been forced to become. In time, I managed to rescue Emily from the dark depths of her captivity, offering her a chance at a life beyond the horrors of the forest. These words echo in my mind, a stark reminder of the chilling ordeal I faced as an FBI agent on the hunt for a serial kidnapper. This was no ordinary case, and Emily was no ordinary victim. She was a child transformed into a wild creature, a mirror image of her captor. The sight of her, crouched in the corner of that grimy cabin, will forever be etched in my memory. Her haunting eyes, glowing with a feral light, her hair matted and wild, her face smeared with dirt and blood. The child was a living embodiment of the horrors that lurk within the hearts of some individuals. But Emily was also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the unimaginable horrors she had endured, she had survived. She had adapted, become something other, something primal to survive. And in her eyes, I saw not just fear and wariness, but a spark of hope, a spark that I vowed to nurture and protect. My mission was not just to rescue Emily, but to help her reclaim her humanity. This was no easy task. The feral child was wary, untrusting, but slowly, with patience and compassion, I started to see changes. Emily started to trust, to understand that not all humans were monsters. As I reflect on this harrowing experience, I'm reminded of the darkness that exists in the world. But I'm also reminded of the light, the potential for change and healing. Emily's journey is far from over. The road to reintegration into society is a long and challenging one. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt and fear, but I believe in Emily. I believe in her strength and resilience. I knew it would be a long and difficult journey to reintegrate her into society, but I was determined to help her heal from the unspeakable trauma she had endured. I was a man of logic and reason, trained to investigate and solve crimes that defied explanation. But nothing could have prepared me for the case of Charlotte, a woman who vanished without a trace during a hiking trip near a remote forest. As a retired FBI agent, I was accustomed to the ordinary and the extraordinary, but this case was different. It was as if Charlotte had been swallowed whole by the forest, leaving no trace of her passing. The forest was a place of profound silence and solitude, a vast expanse of trees that stretched as far as the eye could see. The locals, a hardy, close-knit community, lived in the shadow of the forest, a constant reminder of the wilderness that lay just beyond their homes. They spoke of the forest in hushed whispers, their eyes reflecting a mix of fear and respect. They talked of an old curse, of strange happenings, and of those who had ventured too far into the forest depths and never returned. The small town nearby was an isolated dot on the map, a place where the modern world seemed to have softly faded into the background. The people here lived simple lives, untouched by the hustle and bustle of city life. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic rural setting, a sense of unease lingered. The town's inhabitants were polite but reserved, their smiles failing to reach their wary eyes. The disappearance of Charlotte had sent a ripple of fear through the community. The locals were more than willing to help, but their assistance was tinged with apprehension. They knew something I didn't, something they weren't willing to share. But I was determined to find Charlotte, to bring her back to her worried husband, to restore some semblance of normalcy to this quiet town. The forest loomed ominously before me, its trees standing tall like ancient guardians. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant call of a bird. The forest seemed to be waiting, its secrets hidden beneath a dense canopy of leaves. Undeterred by the chilling tales, I pressed on, determined to find the missing wife. As I delved deeper into the forest, the air became thick with an unnatural stillness. A sense of foreboding hung heavy, like a shroud muffling the usual forest sounds. The rustling leaves, the chirping birds, all seemed to quiet down, as if afraid to break the oppressive silence. The trees around me were ancient sentinels, their gnarled limbs reaching out in eerie formations. They seemed to whisper warnings with every gust of wind, their leaves rustling like quiet pleas for retreat. The twisted roots underfoot seemed to grasp and claw, as though trying to hinder my progress deeper into the forest. But it wasn't just the trees that bore the mark of the malign. As I ventured further, I began to notice strange symbols etched onto the bark of the tree trunks. They were not the work of man, but of something much older, something that defied logic and reason. The symbols pulsed with an energy that was both fascinating and terrifying, an energy that seemed to seep into my very soul. As I pushed onward, a chill wind swept through the forest, carrying faint whispers. These whispers were not of this world. They were voices of despair, voices of longing, voices of the lost. They seemed to originate from the very heart of the forest, echoing through the dense undergrowth and reverberating off the ancient trees. I could feel the forest watching me. Every rustle of the leaves, every creak of a branch, every whisper of the wind seemed to be observing me, tracking my every move. It was as if the forest itself was alive, aware and wary of my presence. And yet, despite the eerie symbols and the spectral whispers, despite the feeling of being watched in the bone-chilling cold, I pressed on. I was a man on a mission, driven by a purpose that outweighed the fear that silenced the whispers, that made the ominous signs seem insignificant. Ignoring the ominous signs, I followed the faint trail left by Charlotte. One fateful night, I stumbled upon an abandoned cabin deep within the forest. The structure was old, its wooden walls weathered by time and the harsh elements. Paint, once vibrant and full of life, was now peeling and faded, surrendering to the relentless march of time. The windows, once clear and inviting, were now clouded over with years of neglect, shrouding the interior in an eerie twilight. As I stepped over the threshold, the air inside was heavy, saturated with the palpable stench of decay. It was an odor that clung to the back of my throat, a grim reminder of the cabin's forgotten past. Each creaking step across the worn floorboards echoed through the silent rooms, a symphony of solitude and desolation. In the dim light, I found a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. It was a chronicle of despair, a testament to the tragic fate of those who had fallen victim to a curse older than the towering trees outside. As I leafed through the entries, the chilling tale of the Wendigo took form. The Wendigo, an entity born of hunger and despair, was a spectral figure that roamed the forest, consuming the souls of those unfortunate enough to cross its path. It was a creature of the night, its existence interwoven with the darkness that blanketed the forest. Each entry in the journal was a chilling reminder of the Wendigo's power, a power that had claimed Charlotte. According to the entries, Charlotte had unwittingly trespassed into the Wendigo's territory. She had ventured too far into the heart of the forest, into the realm of the Wendigo. The curse had seized her, initiating an insidious transformation that threatened to consume her soul. As I closed the journal, a sense of dread washed over me. The chilling tales of the Wendigo were no longer just stories. They were a horrifying reality. Charlotte was in grave danger, and I was her only hope. The ancient curse had begun its insidious transformation, and time was running out. Determined to save her, I followed a cryptic map outlined in the journal, leading me to an ancient burial ground hidden within the heart of the forest. The air was thick with menace, the silence punctuated only by the distant hooting of an owl. An eerie glow permeated through the dense foliage, casting long, monstrous shadows that danced and twisted with the wind. Suddenly, a gut-wrenching growl echoed through the forest, sending a chill down my spine. There it was, the Wendigo, a grotesque abomination, once a loving wife, now a vessel for an ancient curse. Her eyes, once full of life, now glowed with an otherworldly hunger, her form twisted and distorted by the malevolent force that held her captive. The Wendigo lunged, its distorted cries echoing through the forest, the sound chilling my blood. I fought back, my every move a desperate bid to reclaim Charlotte from the monstrous entity. The fight was brutal, the Wendigo's strength fueled by the curse that had consumed her, but I was driven by a force stronger than any curse, my determination to save her. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath as we battled. The Wendigo's claws slashed through the air, its cries resonating with a primal rage. With each blow, I felt the weight of the ancient evil bearing down on me, but I held on, my resolve unwavering. In the heart of the battle, a horrifying realization dawned on me. The creature I was fighting was not just the Wendigo. It was Charlotte, trapped within the monstrous form. Her soul, ensnared by the curse, was crying out for deliverance. The thought of it filled me with a renewed sense of urgency. I could not, would not, let the curse claim her. As the battle raged on, I felt the toll of the fight on my body, but the sight of Charlotte, trapped within the Wendigo, spurred me on. I fought with every ounce of strength I had left, my heart pounding with the desperate hope of freeing her from the ancient curse. With each blow, I felt the weight of the ancient evil bearing down on me. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the only way to free Charlotte's soul was to destroy the cursed artifact hidden within the forest, the source of the Wendigo's power. With grim determination, I ventured deeper into the heart of darkness, facing unspeakable horrors as I sought the key to breaking the curse. The forest, once an ominous presence, seemed to guide me now, leading me towards the cursed heart of the ancient woods. The path twisted and turned, taking me through dense undergrowth and past towering trees that had stood witness to countless centuries of dark rituals and tragedies. Each step brought me closer to the artifact, a gnarled talisman that pulsed with a malevolent energy. Summoning all my courage, I reached out and grasped the talisman. It was cold to the touch, humming with an otherworldly power that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the curse's hold on Charlotte, a chilling tether that connected her to this ancient symbol of darkness. With a roar of defiance, I shattered the artifact. The forest around me seemed to tremble as the talisman's destruction echoed like a death knell. The once oppressive air lightened, the shadows retreating as if banished by an unseen force. The curse had been broken. Finding Charlotte was a moment of pure relief. She lay weakened, her body frail but free from the Wendigo's grasp. I cradled her in my arms, feeling the warmth return to her as the curse's icy grip faded away. The forest, once a place of terror, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The twisted limbs of the ancient trees relaxed, their ominous whispers replaced by a tranquil silence. The Wendigo was no more, its tortured cries fading into the wind as the curse that had held it captive was finally broken. The ancient woods reclaimed their eerie stillness, a testament to the horrors that had transpired. We emerged from the forest, forever changed by our ordeal, bearing a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates reason from nightmares. The Wendigo's tortured cries faded into the wind, and the ancient woods reclaimed their eerie stillness. My name is Dennis, and I used to be an FBI special agent. My career was punctuated by a slew of run-ins with dangerous criminals, gruesome crime scenes that would make your skin crawl, and high-stakes investigations that kept me on my toes, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found in the desolate woods of Redwood Falls. It was a case unlike anything I'd encountered before. A string of mysterious disappearances had set the small town on edge. The local authorities were at their wits' end, their faces etched with confusion and fear. The community was gripped by a terror that seemed to hang in the air, a palpable dread that made your hair stand on end. They needed answers, and I was determined to find them. I remember the first time I set foot in those woods, drawn in by the whispers of the unknown. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of foreboding, like stepping into a world that had been paused, waiting for the next player to make a move. The moonlight had no place there, blocked out by the dense canopy of trees that stretched out above me. The silence was near deafening, broken only by the crunch of leaves under my boots and the distant call of an owl, a haunting serenade in the stillness of the night. The case had led me deep into the heart of those woods, to an old, run-down cabin that stood as a testament to time. It was a picture of decay, with shattered windows and weathered wooden walls that seemed to groan under the weight of their own history. Yet, there was a strange magnetism to it, an irresistible pull that led me towards its ominous embrace. As I approached, the beam from my flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock my intrusion. The door creaked open with a sound that sent chills down my spine, revealing an interior steeped in a sickly pallor. I stepped inside, my hand instinctively reaching for the grip of my weapon. I was determined to unravel the mystery, to bring an end to the nightmare that had gripped Redwood Falls. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere changed. The once familiar woods took on a new, menacing persona under the cloak of darkness. Each towering tree seemed to leer ominously, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air grew thick and heavy as if it too was burdened by the unspeakable secrets the woods held. The forest was a labyrinth, a maze of towering trees and dense undergrowth. The path I had been following gradually faded away, swallowed by the relentless wilderness. The eerie stillness was deafening, the silence only punctuated by the unsettling rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as if the forest itself was alive, its every breath echoing in the still night. The moonlight, once a comforting presence, was now a distant memory. The dense canopy above weaved a thick blanket of darkness, smothering any remnants of light. The forest was a world plunged into perpetual night, a realm where shadows reigned supreme. My flashlight was my only beacon, its weak beam fighting a losing battle against the engulfing darkness. The woods were no longer just a physical space, but a living, breathing entity. Each rustling leaf, each snapping twig seemed to carry a whispered warning, a haunting lullaby sung by the forest itself. The woods were speaking, their voice a chilling symphony of nature's raw power and primal fear. Even the sounds of the forest seemed to grow more ominous. The distant hoot of an owl was a solitary serenade in the chilling silence, its echo lingering in the air like a ghostly apparition. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots was a harsh reminder of my intrusion into this forsaken place, a discordant note in the forest's eerie symphony. The deeper I ventured, the more the forest closed in around me. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their shadows merging into a wall of impenetrable darkness. I was a stranger here, a trespasser in a realm that belonged to the shadows and the unseen. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the distant hoot of an owl. The woods, once a sanctuary of nature's beauty, were now a desolate wilderness, a haunting testament to the unknown lurking within its depths. I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows shattered and its wooden walls weathered by time. The cabin, standing alone in the midst of the dark forest, was a chilling sight. Its eerie silhouette seemed to loom ominously in the darkness, a testament to forgotten tales and untold horrors. As I drew closer, an inexplicable force seemed to pull me towards it. The stillness of the forest was broken only by the crunch of leaves under my boots and the distant hoot of an owl. Yet as I approached the cabin, an unsettling silence seemed to settle. It was as though the woods themselves held their breath, watching me with unseen eyes. The cabin door creaked open with a chilling groan, revealing an interior bathed in a sickly pale light. The air inside was stale and heavy, permeated with an odor that made my stomach churn. It was a smell of decay, of time standing still, of secrets hidden away in the darkness. As I ventured into the cabin, my flashlight flickered on the walls, revealing strange symbols etched into the aged wood. The symbols, drawn in what seemed to be dried blood, were unlike anything I had ever seen. They were raw, primal, radiating an energy that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Each room in the cabin held its own share of disturbing artifacts. Broken furniture, cobweb-covered trinkets, and tattered remnants of what might have once been personal belongings. But it was the feeling of being watched, the feeling of unseen eyes following my every move, that truly sent a shiver down my spine. As I navigated through the cabin, the sense of unease grew stronger. Each creak of the floor, each gust of wind that whistled through the shattered windows seemed to whisper a warning. It was as though the cabin itself was alive, its heartbeat echoing in the silence, its breath stirring the dust-laden air. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something ancient, something that defied rational explanation. The cabin, with its ominous presence, its strange symbols, and its inexplicable energy, was more than just a forgotten structure in the woods. It was a gateway to a world that was beyond my understanding, a world that was ancient, dark, and terrifyingly real. A sudden noise behind me made me whirl around, drawing my weapon. But there was nothing, just the eerie silence of the woods outside. My heart pounded in my chest as I returned my attention to the cabin, my senses heightened by the unexpected interruption. As I scanned the room, my flashlight beam caught a peculiar sight. A rotting rug curled at one corner. Intrigued, I moved towards it, pushing it aside to reveal a hidden trapdoor beneath. A cold wave of apprehension washed over me as I stared at the concealed entrance. The trapdoor was old and weathered, its wooden surface marred by scratches and stains. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough texture, and with a deep breath, I pushed it open. The sight that greeted me was a narrow, winding staircase descending into an abyss. The air grew colder, a stark contrast to the mild autumn night outside. The darkness below seemed to pulsate, as if it were a living entity, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized that this was not just a basement, but a descent into a realm of the unknown. With each step I took, the oppressive darkness seemed to grow denser, swallowing up the beam of my flashlight. The staircase creaked under my weight, echoing ominously through the silent void. I could feel the walls closing in, the confined space amplifying my rising sense of dread. I was venturing into a nightmare, a labyrinth buried beneath the unsuspecting surface of the earth. The air grew thick and stale, a tangible reminder of the forgotten horrors that this place held. I could almost hear the whispers of the past, the echoes of secrets long buried, reverberating through the cold stone walls. I felt a growing unease, a primal fear that gnawed at my resolve, but I pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and a relentless pursuit of the truth. The stairs seemed to go on forever, each step taking me deeper into the heart of darkness. Just as I contemplated turning back, doubting the sanity of my decision, my foot hit solid ground. I had reached the bottom. The labyrinth had given way to a chamber, a hidden sanctum veiled in shadows and shrouded in a chilling silence. A dim, flickering light revealed a cavernous chamber. It was an unholy sight that greeted me. A circle of hooded figures, their faces hidden, their bodies swaying rhythmically to a chilling chant that echoed off the ancient stone walls. The language was unrecognizable, yet the words seemed to reverberate within my very soul, filling me with a bone-deep dread. In the center of this macabre dance of shadows lay the townsfolk, their bodies limp and eyes vacant. They were bound and gagged, their faces pale with terror. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had stumbled upon a ritual, an unholy ceremony that defied comprehension. The chanting intensified, reaching a fevered pitch that seemed to shake the very earth beneath us. The cavern trembled, the air thick with an energy that was palpable, tangible. I reached for my weapon, but it was too late. The ritual was reaching its climax. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to free the captives. As I led the disoriented townsfolk back through the winding tunnels, the walls seemed to close in around us. The earth beneath us trembled as if angered by our escape. The once familiar woods now felt alien and hostile, each rustle and shadow hinting at unseen horrors lurking in the darkness. Emerging into the cold night, we gasped for air, the sweet taste of freedom tainted by the lingering terror. Behind us, the cabin groaned and shivered before collapsing into a heap of splinters and dust as if swallowed by the very earth it stood on. The local authorities took over, their faces a mirror of my own disbelief and fear. The missing townsfolk were safe, but the scars of their ordeal would linger, just as the memory of that night would forever haunt me. The woods of Redwood Falls harbored a malevolence that transcended the physical realm, a darkness that forever changed the way I viewed the world. The moon hung high in the ink-black sky, casting an eerie glow on the dense thicket of trees that surrounded me. The chill of the night air seeped through my FBI vest, a stark reminder of the gravity of my situation. My name is Dennis Hargrove, a retired special agent from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I've navigated the labyrinth of human horrors throughout my career, yet the assignment that led me to the heart of these woods was unlike any other. It began as a simple missing persons case, but there was an unsettling undertone right from the start. The disappearance occurred near Ravenswood, a small town hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains. It's a place where people keep their secrets close, and missing persons are usually solved with a simple explanation, but not this time. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the deafening silence was punctuated by the eerie crunch of leaves under my boots. The wind whispered through the skeletal branches, its ghostly choir sending shivers down my spine. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, a predator lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. The trail drew me deeper into the woods, away from the comforting glow of civilization. The trees leaned in, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, as if trying to pull me into their twisted embrace. I switched on my flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, yet revealing only more shadows. Time seemed to lose all meaning as the tension in the air grew thicker with each passing hour. It was then that I stumbled upon a clearing. Bathed in moonlight, a makeshift altar stood adorned with twisted symbols that seemed to have been painted in blood. A chill ran down my spine, my hand instinctively reaching for the comfort of my sidearm. This was no ordinary missing persons case. As I pressed forward, the woods seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy. The wind rustled through the skeletal branches, creating a symphony of whispers that seemed to echo with an unearthly cadence. Each rustle, each creak, each eerie whisper seemed to carry a warning, a plea to turn back. Yet the weight of my badge, the weight of my duty, propelled me deeper into the shadows. The further I ventured, the more the forest seemed to distort, to twist into grotesque parodies of nature. Trees bent and warped as if in agony, their gnarled branches reaching out like the hands of the damned. The moonlight filtered through the twisted canopy, casting long, monstrous shadows that danced and writhed with a life of their own. The air hung heavy with an oppressive silence, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Yet beneath that silence I heard it, a soft, persistent murmur, a chorus of voices, so faint and distant like the echoes of the long departed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of sounds that seemed to seep into my very soul. I could feel it, a palpable dread that wrapped around me like a shroud. The whispers grew into voices, the voices into screams, each one filled with pain, with fear, with despair. Yet amidst the chaos, a single phrase repeated over and over, a mantra that chilled me to my core. Turn back. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to heed the warning, to flee from the darkness that lay ahead. But I was not just a man. I was an agent of the FBI, bound by duty and honor. Fear was not an option. I had a job to do, a mission to complete. So I pressed on, each step taking me deeper into the heart of the forest, each step echoing with the whispers of the unseen. The dread grew stronger, the voices louder, the darkness more suffocating. But I would not turn back. I had to confront it head-on. The trail led me to an old, dilapidated cabin, nestled deep within the heart of the forest. Its wooden frame was weathered, and time had not been kind. The windows were dark, void of any life or warmth. Yet it felt as if the cabin was watching me, its silence speaking volumes. My instincts told me this was more than a mere dwelling. This was a place where the veil between our world and the unknown was thin, where nightmares and reality coexisted. The air around the cabin was heavy, almost stifling, as if it held its breath in anticipation. The wind no longer whispered, but it held a pregnant silence, a respectful hush for the scene that was about to unfold. I approached the cabin with a sense of trepidation, each step echoing in the stillness of the night. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a drum roll for the impending confrontation. The door stood ajar, a silent invitation into the abyss. I could feel the darkness seeping out from the crack, a tangible evil that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. My hand instinctively went to the grip of my sidearm, the cold metal a small comfort against the unknown. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the horrors that awaited me inside. The world seemed to hold its breath as I reached the door, the forest around me falling into a hushed silence. I could feel the weight of the cabin's gaze, its dark windows watching me with an almost sentient awareness. The moonlight cast long, foreboding shadows that danced across the rotting wood, the world holding its breath in anticipation. I paused for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling on my shoulders. It felt as if I was standing at the precipice of the unknown, the abyss staring back with an almost mocking grin. But I was Dennis Hargrove, special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had faced down the worst that humanity had to offer, and I would not be deterred by the shadows. With a determined grit, I pushed the door open, the creak a death knell in the silent night. I stepped inside, the darkness enveloping me like a shroud. I kicked open the door, gun drawn, ready for whatever nightmare awaited me inside. The scene that greeted me would haunt my dreams for years to come. Within the decrepit confines of the cabin, a tableau of terror was etched in blood and shadow. Symbols and sigils, arcane and ancient, danced in the flickering glow of my flashlight, their meanings lost to time and fear. Center stage, a figure of nightmares hunched over a blood-soaked altar, its form grotesque and unholy, a perversion of nature. The missing person, or what remained of their once human form, lay discarded at its feet like a rag doll forgotten by a cruel child. As the creature turned, light glinted in its eyes, a malevolent fire that seemed to burn from within. It was an intelligence that was not of this world, a dark wisdom steeped in the blood of countless victims. The air thickened, becoming almost solid with the weight of its presence, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp and twist around it. A chilling voice, guttural and ancient, echoed in the corners of my mind, a language that was as old as the hills and as unnatural as the being itself. The walls of the cabin seemed to pulse with its words, the symbols on the walls glowing with an unholy light, their meanings suddenly clear in my mind's eye. Then, with a speed that belied its hulking form, it lunged. Instinct took over, the years of training and survival instinct honed to a razor's edge. My gun was in my hand, the cold steel a comforting weight against the growing darkness. Shots rang out, their thunderous reports echoing in the confined space of the cabin. The creature recoiled, a snarl escaping its maw. But it did not fall. It did not bleed. It simply laughed, a sound that was as terrifying as it was alien. It was a mockery of life, a creature that defied the laws of nature and man. As the smoke cleared, it stood there, a titan of nightmare, unscathed and unbroken. More shots rang out, each one a desperate plea for salvation. But the creature seemed impervious to harm. As the battle raged on, I felt the grip of an otherworldly force tightening around me. This was no mere physical adversary I was up against. It was a creature from the darkest recesses of our nightmares, an embodiment of malevolence that seemed to feed on fear and despair. The creature lunged at me again, its grotesque form a blur in the darkness. Its voice echoed in my mind, a vile whisper that seemed to bypass my ears and go straight to my soul. It spoke in a language that was ancient and unnatural, its words writhing like serpents in my mind, promising unspeakable horrors, a darkness that would consume me. I could feel my resolve wavering, my strength ebbing away under the weight of the creature's relentless assault. It was as if it was trying to break me, to shatter my spirit and leave me a shell of the man I once was. Each physical attack was accompanied by a psychological one, a horrifying vision, an echo of a scream, a whiff of decay. But amidst the chaos, I found a spark of defiance within me. I was Dennis Hargrove, a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had faced down murderers and psychopaths. I had stared into the abyss and come out the other side. I was not about to be defeated by this thing. With every fiber of my being, I fought back, my gun blazing in the darkness. The creature roared, its voice a chilling symphony of pain and rage. But I did not falter. I pushed back against the darkness, against the fear, against the creature's attempts to break me. The struggle felt like it lasted an eternity, a never-ending cycle of attack and counterattack, of fear and defiance. But with each passing moment, I could feel the creature's grip on me loosening, its voice in my mind growing fainter. The darkness that had threatened to consume me was receding, replaced by a glimmer of hope, a beacon of resilience. I had confronted the darkness and survived. I had faced my worst nightmare and emerged victorious. But I fought against it with every ounce of strength I had left. In the dim glow of the moonlight, I trudged through the dense woods, my senses heightened by the eerie silence that enveloped the night. I am Dennis, a retired FBI special agent, seasoned by years of hunting down the most dangerous of criminals. Yet, on this mission, I was not hunting a man, but a mystery that had swallowed up several lives in its enigmatic maw. The locals had spoken in hushed whispers of a faceless man who haunted these woods. They said he was a spectral figure that left no trace, a phantom that struck paralyzing fear into the hearts of those who dared to trespass his domain. I, however, dismissed these tales as mere folklore, figments of overactive imaginations fueled by fear of the unknown. As I ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, the air grew dense with an unsettling stillness. The usual nocturnal chorus of rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls mutated into an oppressive silence, seemingly suffocating the very life out of the woods. My flashlight sliced through the inky blackness, its beam revealing gnarled branches that twisted like skeletal fingers, reaching out from the foreboding shadows. A sudden chill seeped into the air, and an inexplicable feeling of unease began to settle in the pit of my stomach. I tightened my grip on my weapon, my trained eyes scanning the surroundings with heightened caution. The echo of my footsteps seemed to reverberate through the silent abyss, each crunch of the fallen leaves amplifying my burgeoning sense of vulnerability. Then, almost imperceptibly, the woods came alive with whispers. Indistinct murmurs swirled around me, their source hidden in the shadows. The words were elusive, slipping through my comprehension like elusive specters, their taunting laughter echoing in my ears. With each step I took, the whispers grew louder, forming a symphony of dissonant tones that seemed to penetrate my very soul. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing gnarled branches that twisted like skeletal fingers, reaching out from the shadows. A sudden chill gripped the air, and a feeling of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. The stillness of the night was shattered by the whispers of the trees, an unseen chorus that seemed to echo from every shadow. My senses were on high alert, every nerve straining to decipher the sounds that danced on the edge of audibility. The woods opened up into a clearing, a stage set by the moonlight for a single solitary figure. A figure that stood motionless, its form cast in an otherworldly glow. As I raised my flashlight, the beam fell upon a face, or rather, the lack of one. It was a man, but where his features should have been, there was only emptiness, a black void that sent shivers down my spine. "Special Agent Dennis," a voice echoed, not through the air, but inside my mind. It was cold, devoid of emotion, and yet filled with an ominous resonance that made my blood run cold. The faceless man stood still, yet his presence seemed to fill the clearing, a malevolent force that permeated the very air I breathed. I tried to respond, to assert my authority, but my voice was a mere whisper in the wind, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The figure began to move, gliding towards me with an unnatural grace that belied the terror it instilled. My hand reached for my radio, fingers trembling as I pressed the call button, but the forest swallowed my plea for help. The whispers grew louder, a discordant symphony that seemed to reverberate within my very soul. The figure was upon me now, its faceless visage a terrifying abyss that threatened to consume me. Panic set in, and I fumbled for my radio to call for backup, but the forest seemed to swallow my signals. The faceless man was a specter in the night, a chilling reminder of the unknown that lurked just beyond the veil of understanding. The encounter was over as quickly as it began, leaving me alone in the silent woods, the echoes of the faceless man's voice still ringing in my ears. In the blink of an eye, he was upon me. The faceless man, a specter of the night, seemed to glide effortlessly across the clearing, his form an eerily silent silhouette against the moonlit backdrop. My heart pounded like a war drum in my chest, each beat echoing the primal fear that coursed through my veins. His lack of features was a void that seemed to draw in the surrounding light, creating an unsettling contrast against the pale glow of the moon. I could feel his cold, featureless gaze, a chilling sensation that sent a shiver down my spine. Despite having no eyes, I knew he was watching me, his attention focused with an intensity that was almost palpable. As he moved closer, the whispers that had once been a mere murmur in the forest grew louder, morphing into a symphony of dissonant voices. They swirled around me, their indistinct words intertwining with the chilling breeze, creating a haunting melody that resonated within the confines of my mind. Time seemed to lose its meaning, each second stretching into an eternity as I stood rooted to the spot, trapped in the faceless man's aura of dread. The world around me started to warp, the forest blurring at the edges until all that remained was the figure before me. Then, just as the fear threatened to consume me, a suffocating darkness crept in, swallowing the moonlight and casting the world into an abyss of shadows. It felt as if the very air had been sucked out of the clearing, replaced with a cold void that seeped into my bones. I could still feel his presence, an oppressive force that lingered in the darkness. Despite the lack of light, I could see him, his form standing out against the pitch black, a phantom forever etched into my mind. His attack was not physical, yet it was devastating. It was an assault on my sanity, a relentless barrage of fear that threatened to shatter my resolve. I could feel my strength waning, the darkness creeping in, threatening to consume me. Time seemed to warp as a suffocating darkness enveloped my consciousness. This was the faceless man's attack, a terrifying encounter that would forever haunt my dreams and taint my perception of the world. The next thing I knew, I was alone in the silent woods. The faceless man vanished without a trace. The forest, once teeming with whispers and a spectral presence, was now eerily silent, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. With the disappearance of the faceless man, it seemed as though the forest had exhaled, releasing a breath it had been holding since my arrival. I found myself disoriented, the events of the night cascading through my mind in a disjointed flurry. The faceless man, the whispers, the chilling voice that echoed in my mind, they all seemed like fragments of a nightmarish dream. Yet the cold sweat trickling down my spine and the pounding of my heart were all too real, chilling reminders of the uncanny encounter. I rose slowly, my body heavy with exhaustion. The forest around me, once familiar and comforting, now felt foreign and hostile. Each shadow seemed to conceal a lurking horror, each rustle of the leaves a sinister whisper. I tightened my grip on my flashlight, the feeble beam of light my only refuge in the enveloping darkness. With each step, I felt the weight of the forest pressing against me, as if trying to swallow me into its depths. I stumbled over roots and slipped on damp leaves, my progress slow and laborious. Yet I pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to escape the oppressive silence and return to the safety of civilization. As I navigated the labyrinthine forest, the haunting image of the faceless man flickered in my mind. His absence was as unsettling as his presence, a void that echoed with whispers of the unknown. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracing my every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. The once familiar landscape now felt alien, each tree a twisted sentinel, each path a winding maze leading deeper into the heart of the unknown. Yet I stumbled my way back to civilization, my body bruised and battered, my spirit shaken but unbroken. I was haunted by the encounter with the enigmatic figure that defied reason, a chilling reminder of the inexplicable horrors that lurk in the shadows, waiting to reveal themselves to those who dare to seek the truth. To this day, the memory of that night lingers, a chilling reminder that there are forces in the shadows. It's an echo in the back of my mind, a shadow that follows me even in the brightest of days. The encounter with the faceless man wasn't just a test of my courage, but a test of my understanding of the world as I knew it. The faceless man wasn't just a figment of imagination spun by the locals. He was real as the fear that seized me that night in the woods. He was a manifestation of the unknown, the inexplicable, a testament to the mysteries that lie beyond the realms of human comprehension. I've seen things in my career, things that would make your skin crawl, but nothing compares to the faceless man. He was an enigma, a paradox, a question with no answers. He was a faceless terror in the dark, a spectral figure that left no trace, yet left an indelible mark on my psyche. His existence challenged everything I thought I knew. It forced me to question the nature of reality, the boundaries of the known and the unknown. It forced me to accept the existence of forces beyond human understanding, forces that lurk in the shadows hidden from the prying eyes of man. But as unnerving as it was, the encounter with the faceless man was also a revelation. It opened my eyes to the mysteries of the universe, mysteries that remain unsolved, mysteries that continue to tantalize and terrify us. It reaffirmed the fact that we are but a speck in the vast cosmos, surrounded by countless enigmas waiting to be discovered. In the end, the faceless man was not just an adversary, but a teacher. He taught me the value of curiosity, the importance of pushing boundaries, of daring to explore the unexplored. He taught me that fear is a natural response to the unknown, but it should never deter us from seeking the truth. The encounter with the faceless man was a defining moment in my life, a moment that continues to shape my understanding of the world. It's a chilling reminder that there are forces in the shadows, lurking beyond the realm of understanding, waiting to reveal themselves to those who dare to seek the truth. And so, our tale of the Campfire Horrors comes to an end. Until next time, sleep tight. Before we part ways, dear viewers, remember to stay vigilant. The Campfire Horrors may have been extinguished for now, but the embers of the unknown always remain. As you lay down to sleep tonight, don't forget the lessons from our tale. Safety is but a fleeting moment in a world of unseen. So, if you've enjoyed this journey into the abyss, don't forget to ring that bell and smash that like button. Do it before the thing under your bed decides to pay you a visit. Oh, and keep those night lights on. You never know what might be lurking in the dark. Thank you for embarking on this terrifying adventure with us. Until our paths cross again in another tale of the unknown. Goodbye and sweet dreams, if you can.